As we end today's show with the words of the renowned primatologist and conservationist Jane Goodall, who's died at the age of 91. We interviewed her at the Paris Climate Summit in 2015.
I'm here really to talk about the importance of saving the rainforest as a way of mitigating climate change, because I know more about that than many of the other issues, although I talk about all of them.
Why is it important to save the rainforest?
Because they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and as we cut them down and burn them, that CO2 is released back from the trees, the leaves, and also from the forest soils. And about 50% of our tropical rainforests have already gone. They're going at a tremendously fast rate, and even when they are protected in many countries because of corruption, the power of the corporations, the worship of money and profit, the protection isn't always saving the forest.
You have recently been in the United States. You know there's a presidential election going on there. Can you talk about, especially in the Republican Party, the presidential candidates like the leading candidate, Donald Trump's denial that climate change is caused by human beings overwhelmingly?
Well, I listened to Donald Trump saying, that he doesn't believe that we've caused or are causing climate change, and some of the other right-wing leaders. And I just ask myself, do they really believe what they're saying? Because it seems so very obvious. And if you read the facts, I don't see how you can come to any other conclusion but that it's our misuse of fossil fuels, the emissions from agriculture, from industry, from households, the vast impact that's being made by this intensive farming of animals. And in order to feed the billions and billions of cows and pigs and chickens, even if you don't care about the cruelty, even if you refuse to admit that these are individuals with feelings who feel pain and have emotions, even if you don't admit that, you have to admit huge areas of forest are cut down to grow grain, to feed them. Intensive cattle grazing is turning forest to woodland, to scrubland. And food in one end, gas out both ends, that's methane, and that's an even more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. It's about 36% of all methane emissions come from this intensive farming.
Of cows?
Cows, pigs, the whole thing.
Can you talk about how diet fuels climate change and why you're a vegetarian?
I'm a vegetarian partly because, I respect animals. I know they're all individuals. And I wouldn't eat a cow any more than I would eat my dog.
What have you learned as a leading primatologist, expert in chimpanzees and baboons that most of us don't know?
I think it's really started a long time ago. When I went to study chimpanzees in 1960, I hadn't even been to college. And when I went to Cambridge 2 years later, because
Where did you go to study?
Cambridge. I went to Gombe National Park in Tanzania. It was Tanganyika back then, all that time ago in 1960. And after I'd been there for about 2 years, my mentor, the late Louis Leakey, told me I had to get a degree. He got me a place in Cambridge straight into a PhD, because he said there was no time for a BA. And imagine my shock when these erudite professors, of whom I was a little nervous, told me I'd done everything wrong, that I should have given the chimpanzees numbers, not names, that I couldn't talk about them having personalities, minds capable of problem solving, and certainly not emotions. Why? Because those were unique to us. And in fact, back then, it was generally thought that there was a sharp line between us and the rest of the animals, and it was a difference of kind. And it's so clearly a difference of degree, with the same building blocks of life that we can trace through evolution, coming up from very primitive sort of creatures and ending up in our bodies too. So basically, the chimpanzees opened the door for a new way of thinking about animals, to admit that we are not the only beings with personality, mind, and emotions. And that it makes us ask the question, but we are different. So what's the biggest difference? Development of the intellect. How is it possible that the most intellectual creature that's ever walked the planet is destroying its only home?
We're talking about the globe, the fate of the planet. How can one person make a difference?
Well, the thing is, it's not about one person. Can they make a difference? Everybody, every day, does make a difference. And if we think about the consequences of the choices we make, what we buy, what we eat, what we wear, and we start making the right ethical choices, then when that's multiplied 1,000, a million, a billion, several billion times, then we see the world moving towards change. So the most important thing is to give people hope. I've seen areas that have been destroyed that have come back to be beautiful again and support life. Nature is resilient.
Jane Goodall has died at the age of 91. We interviewed her a number of times on Democracy Now!, most recently back in 2015 at the Paris Climate Summit. To see that full interview and all the others, go to democracynow.org. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.